these things that I used to think made my family bad are actually what make my family very beautiful.
What better place to talk about my family tree than in my family's tree?
I really wanted to film in the treehouse, but of course that's outside, so comes with all the outside noises, so we'll both do our best to pardon all of that. Where to begin? My mom was born and raised in Hawaii. She's the firstborn from her parents, who are from the Philippines. It's a very Filipino-American story of my grandpa being in the military and then immigrating to the US. Once she graduated high school, my mom moved to Sacramento. While she was in college, she became pregnant with me. Sacramento is where I was born and raised. She and my biological father had dated while she was in school. They both kind of have their own versions of the story, but from what I understand, it seemed to be kind of a mutual agreement that he wasn't going to be in my life. I grew up with him not as a part of my childhood. However, my mom did start seeing somebody else who I call my dad. Oh God, I've already started crying. When I was just a few months old, my dad came into my life and stepped up to be my father figure. My dad was born in the Philippines and moved here when he was an infant or when he was really young. He also didn't know his biological father. And I mean, the reason why I get so touchy immediately is because I just love my dad so much. You know, talk about stepping in and providing a love that he didn't necessarily receive directly in his life, you know. He met his biological father once and he has since passed away, so he didn't really get to have a relationship with his biological father. With that being part of his story, it just makes me so appreciative that he stepped into mine. When I was still, I think, less than a year old, or a few months old, my parents got married. Little Whitechapel wedding in Vegas. A couple years later, had my brother, Hunter. The four of us grew up together in Sacramento. People always ask me, like, when I knew that my dad wasn't my biological father. It's like in the back of my head, I always knew, but I just didn't fully know, like, what that meant, because as a kid, you just don't really understand how, like, sex works. My mom just always told me that I was Filipino and Italian, and like I just accepted that but didn't really like get it. We grew up very like a working class family. Both my parents didn't get their degrees but got jobs that can provide for us. My mom was an event coordinator and a yoga instructor. My dad has always been in the realm of online marketing. We got by, but money was always kind of tight growing up. That was always just kind of like in conversation. I think partly due to money, partly due to my parents' jobs, we moved around a lot. I feel like we were in a different house, in a different apartment every couple years or so. I know finances played a pretty big role in the arguments that my parents would have. Yeah, their disagreements could be really aggressive sometimes, and my parents got divorced. It took a little toll on my brother and I. We started doing like the split custody thing. 1 week with my mom, 1 week with my dad. First it was kind of hard for both of my parents to get on their feet, and there was some house hopping with family members, a lot of changes and apartments and schools. Life changed a lot. Both my mom and my dad started introducing my brother and I to other people that they were seeing. Eventually, my mom ended up meeting Douglas, who I refer to as my stepdad, and she ended up having 2 kids with him, my youngest siblings, Harmony and Holden. Around the same time that my mom started being serious with Douglas, Hunter and I had gotten settled into our new public schools. I was in 5th grade. My brother and I had to go to these after-school programs that were made up of all the kids that couldn't get picked up right after school because all of our parents were working. And it had to have been like the very first week that I started going to this brand new school. This like class clown of a guy started making fun of another girl, and I laughed, which was like not good of me, but I was just an immature kid. This girl got upset with him and with me, and she started like making fun of me back. For the first time in my childhood, had like beef with somebody at my school. Immediately it started getting around that like me and this girl didn't like each other. As our parents are waiting to pick us up, her mom and my dad start talking, and soon after they start dating. It's just so funny because it's like out of everybody in the entire school, we ended up becoming stepsisters. My dad starts dating who I end up calling my stepmom, Charlene. She has 3 kids, but her 2 daughters are the ones that ended up moving in together with my dad and my brother. So come middle school, Hunter and I are going back and forth between my mom's house with my stepdad Douglas and Harmony and Holden to my dad's house with Charlene and my stepsisters Deanna and Danielle. And these transitions for me at the same time of like becoming a teenager was a lot. It was kind of difficult at first to adjust living with 2 other girls my age, especially one that I at first really didn't like. I think looking back on it as an adult, we can all kind of agree that it was kind of a toxic relationship. My dad and Charlene did not bring out the best in each other. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of arguments, a lot of screaming. In a way, that is kind of what brought me and my stepsisters together. I absolutely love Deanna and Danielle, step or blood or whatever the case. They will always be like my sisters. So we were going between being at this house with screaming, crying adults to then going to my mom's house that had screaming, crying kids. There's a 11 and 14-year difference between me and my youngest siblings. Living with my mom and having my baby siblings around, of course, was tough at times. Despite all the like changes that were happening in my brother and I's life, Douglas would try really hard to listen to us, especially once Harmony and Holden were born. I'm really grateful to Douglas for that. I find it a little bit difficult to put my finger on exactly what was going on in my head at that time, or like what I was feeling, just with all of the changes and the frustrations and underlying questions that I always wondered about with my own identity and this whole like not knowing my biological father thing. It fostered into some kind of anger or just feeling like I didn't fully belong. So 14 was a very hard year for me. I took a lot of my confusion and frustration out on my parents, and I think that all of the complications with all my parental figures made me start to wonder more about my biological family. So I started demanding my mom tell me more about my biological father, who up to that point I knew nothing about other than his name and that he was Italian. I remember trying to Google him or find out more about him because my mom didn't think I was ready to meet him at that time, which honestly I probably wasn't. But let's talk about that for a second, because I feel like that's some it's just this weird complex that I think a lot of children who don't know their biological fathers have. I blame this on movies like Princess Diaries or The Game Plan, where it's these daughters have these long lost fathers who are actually, perfect in every way, or they're royalty. And so I think when I was facing all these not so comfortable situations at home, I started to wonder, where my perfect family was. And so I started telling my mom I wanted to meet my biological father, and despite our situation being rocky at times, I'm not upset with my parents. I know that my parents and really everybody is operating the best that they can with the tools that have been passed down to them. When I turned 16, my mom offered me the opportunity to meet my biological father. And of course, I said yes. That first meeting, the closest word that I can even think of is numb. It's I didn't feel any strong emotions. It was just kind of surreal to see this person in the flesh when I had only imagined them for so long. That initial meeting, he kind of did fit all the ideas of what I thought he might be like. He was this very put together white guy with a nice stable job, was just getting out of a divorce, and I found out that I had 2 biological brothers, Brandon and Anthony. Anthony's 4 years younger than me, and Brandon's 8 years younger than me. Learning about this whole other side of my family, it felt nice. There is really a power in knowing more about where you come from, and a sense of confidence that comes from more fully knowing about your identity. And I feel like these kind of ideas are things that I'm still developing 10 plus years later after meeting him. So just to recap from right there, whenever people ask me something as simple as tell me about your family or how many siblings do you have, I typically say there's my mom, there's my dad, there's my stepdad, and there's my bio dad. And in total, I have a mix of 7 step and half siblings. But regardless of my blood relationship to them, they're all fully my siblings. All around the same time, when I was 16 till towards the end of high school, Douglas and my mom began to split, and so did my dad and Charlene. A lot of my teenagehood was filled with a lot of moving around. My dad kind of soon after started seeing somebody who he's now engaged to, Rachel, who I love, but at the time I was just so fed up with my parents. It was hard for me to be at peace at either of my parents' places. Even sometimes, unbeknownst to them, I would just sleep in my car because there was just always so much tension and confusion and fighting at home. I think that feeling of not feeling comfortable at home is partly what pushed me to find other coping mechanisms that looked like trying to find stability in a high school relationship or do drugs and drink. I would even cope by investing a lot into organizations in school because I think I was just trying to find that place of belonging. As soon as I graduated high school, I moved to San Diego, and having that independence was super healthy for me because it allowed me to finally just have my own space and be a young adult and reflect on my upbringing. Because I moved just a couple years after I'd met my biological father, we didn't really get to have a whole lot of time. Since then, it's really just getting to see him when I go home for the holidays. And for the most part, I think I was okay with that because I was so fortunate to still have father figures in my life. I wasn't fully sure what his presence in my life was then supposed to be, but it was still kind of just nice to know him. When I turned 21, my biological grandpa took me out to have our first legal drink together. He lightheartedly told me to, be careful, and make sure I don't drink too much. And then he told me that my biological father had struggled with alcoholism. And then I had found out that he'd been to rehab, and that was just a really big issue that he's faced. I felt more hurt from that than I did from him not being in the first 16 years of my life. I felt like that was being hidden from me. And suddenly my idea of this perfect guy that I thought he was changed. I think there's this complex nature versus nurture thing when it comes to parents. It makes you wonder what things you got from them. I just felt lied to. It's just that crazy thing about parents. It's you start to question them and then you start to question yourself. And I started to realize the weight that I carried from all that I did experience and all my parental relationships. I started to confront the responsibility that I had in making each one of these relationships feel less ideal than what I wanted them to be. And so I started speaking to each of my parents one by one and apologizing for the emotions or any foul feelings that I realized I was holding against them. I told my biological father that I want to release not just the bit of resentment that I had towards him not being in my life as a child, but mostly for not feeling like we can be fully open and honest with each other. My biological father has since overcome his addiction and became an addiction counselor himself. And I am so happy that we're able to talk more openly with each other and be more honest with each other and continue to develop our relationship. I apologize to Douglas and my dad for being such an angsty teenager and thanking them for being the best father figures that they could be. I thanked my mom for always doing whatever she could in order to make sure that I and my siblings were taken care of. These were all super tough conversations that still continually happen. I used to think that this was so abnormal, but the reality is that most families are like this. I'm so grateful for all that we've experienced together because it's resulted in so much love and support that we're able to show each other. now I couldn't be more grateful for the way that it is, because it's just shown me more ways to love. These things that I used to think made my family bad are actually what make my family very beautiful. I feel so lucky to get to be the daughter and the sister that I am. And I'm so happy that I get to share that love with other extended and chosen family and with you. To my family, I love you and I wouldn't change a single thing. May we all continue to love and grow and appreciate being with each other. I'm wishing you and your family the absolute best during this holiday season and always.